Aziz, and you're watching A News Weekend. Here are the headlines. At least 51 people died in North Macedonia nightclub fire. The United States launches a wave of airstrikes on Yemen's Houthis. Trump signs an order to cut staff at Voice of America and other U.S.-funded media organizations. A tragic fire in a North Macedonian nightclub has killed at least 51 people and many others are injured. The blaze happened early Sunday morning in the town of Kochani, according to the state news agency, citing the Interior Ministry. The flames quickly engulfed the ceiling and roof of the club, according to officials. Authorities say they are still determining the exact number of victims and those who are injured. The cause of the fire remains unknown. The United States has launched its most significant military operation in the Middle East since President Donald Trump took office in January. Overnight, U.S. forces carried out airstrikes against Yemen's Houthis in response to their attacks on Red Sea shipping. President Trump issued a strong warning, vowing severe consequences if the Houthis do not halt their actions.
U.S. President Donald Trump launched military strikes against Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis on Saturday in response to the group's attacks on Red Sea shipping, warning that hell will rain down upon you if they do not cease their campaign. Video released by U.S. Central Command on Saturday shows a ship firing missiles and a strike hitting a ground target, as seen from an aerial perspective. News agencies are unable to independently verify the video's location or date. The strikes mark the largest U.S. military operation in the Middle East since Trump took office in January. They come as Washington intensifies sanctions on Tehran while seeking to bring it to the negotiating table over its nuclear program. At least 9 civilians were killed and 9 others injured in the U.S. strikes on Yemen's capital, Sana'a, according to the Houthi-run health ministry. The Houthis' political bureau condemned the attacks as a war crime and warned that they would not go unanswered.
U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order slashing funding and reducing the operations of Voice of America and other key government media agencies. The cuts are part of his broader push to shrink the federal bureaucracy and eliminate what he describes as unnecessary spending.
Essentially a demand for...
U.S. President Donald Trump is seeking to cut funding and reduce operations of several federal agencies, including the U.S. Agency for Global Media and the parent organization of Voice of America. It's the latest step by the administration to reduce the size of the federal bureaucracy, a move that aims to reduce operations to what he says will be the bare minimum mandated by law. Among the agencies targeted are VOA, Radio Free Europe/Radio Liberty, and Radio Free Asia. In the wake of the order, more than 1,300 employees at VOA were placed on administrative leave, and funding was terminated for services such as Radio Free Europe. The cuts come just a day after President Trump named Kari Lake, a former news anchor and staunch Trump ally, as the new VOA director. Lake has been vocal about her belief that mainstream media holds an anti-Trump bias and has been tasked with reducing USA GM scope significantly. Advocates for free press have strongly criticized the move. Michael Abramowitz, VOA's director, says he's deeply concerned, as this is the first time in 83 years that the organization has been silenced. VOA provides news in nearly 50 languages, reaching 360 million people every week. Mike Balsamo, president of the National Press Club, called it a blow to America's commitment to a free press. And Reporters Without Borders warn the cuts could endanger press freedom worldwide. Trump is also targeting other agencies, including the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, reducing their operations to minimal legal requirements.
The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer urged world leaders to be ready to defend any Ukraine peace agreement themselves, emphasizing the need to maintain pressure on Russia. Speaking at a virtual meeting with about 25 leaders from Europe, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand on Saturday, he stressed that a ceasefire was essential for any serious peace negotiations. Starmer stated that if Russian President Vladimir Putin was serious about peace, he needed to halt attacks on Ukraine and agree to a ceasefire. The meeting followed a wave of diplomatic efforts by European and Western nations to support Ukraine after U.S. President Donald Trump shifted Washington's approach, launching direct peace talks with Russia. As a result of the virtual summit, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and other world leaders agreed to start preparing detailed plans for a peacekeeping operation. Our Ollie Barrett reports more from London.
Well, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosted 25 countries and organisations for this virtual summit, mostly from Europe, but also the European Union itself, the NATO military alliance, Australia, New Zealand, Canada as well. And Keir Starmer says that new commitments have been made by this so-called coalition of the willing in terms of exactly what some of these countries might be prepared to offer if we do get to the point of a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia needing to be secured. We know that the UK has pledged already that it's prepared to put boots on the ground in that scenario, for example. Details beyond that remain fairly scarce, but the UK will host a meeting of military chiefs on Thursday at which the operational phase of this plan is going to start to come together, we are told. But Keir Starmer also using today to insist that pressure needs to be maintained, he says, on Russia in trying to encourage it to take up the ceasefire plan that has been agreed to by Ukraine and the United States. Some very strong comments after the meeting as well from some of those in attendance. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying that he believes active pressure is needed, not just talks. We've been hearing from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who claims, in his words, Russia does not appear to be genuinely seeking peace. Now, Moscow would dispute that, of course. Australian Prime Minister Albanese going even further. He says President Putin's regime has imperialist designs for Ukraine and beyond. Again, a claim that Moscow would deny. But certainly from a UK perspective, it's been trying to take a leadership role in attempting to put together a peace plan and in trying to be that bridge between some of those European countries working on it and the United States. And Keir Starmer saying that he and his officials remain in daily contact with Washington in this regard. The UK again reiterating its commitment today, not just to putting boots on the ground if they are required in a peacekeeping force, but also, in Keir Starmer's words, planes in the sky. But all eyes now will be focused on Thursday's meeting hosted by London, when military chiefs start to put together a more detailed working plan about how exactly all this might work. Ollie Barrett in London for A News.
Meanwhile, the G7 countries have once again affirmed their commitment to defending Ukraine's freedom and territorial integrity. They condemned military aid to Russia from North Korea, Iran, and China, announcing that stricter measures would be taken against these countries. Additionally, they stated their continued cooperation in ensuring peace and stability in the Middle East and addressing concerns related to China and North Korea.
The G7 countries reaffirmed their commitment to defending Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Foreign ministers of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the High Representative of the European Union in their common statement praised the March 11th meeting between the US and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia and underscored the need for a ceasefire. The G7 called on Russia to agree to a ceasefire on equal terms, warning that failure to do so would result in further sanctions and aid. They highlighted the importance of releasing prisoners of war and providing security guarantees, while pledging continued support for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. The G7 condemned military aid to Russia from North Korea, Iran, and China, announcing stricter measures against these countries. They expressed concern over the war's impact on civilians and infrastructure, reaffirming their commitment to ensuring Ukraine remains democratic and free. The G7 called for the release of hostages in Gaza and the return of bodies to their families, emphasizing humanitarian aid and a lasting ceasefire. They supported a political solution for Palestinians through negotiations, recognized Israel's right to self-defense, and stated Hamas should have no role in Gaza. They also urged the rejection of terrorism in Syria. The G7 highlighted Iran's role in regional instability and the need to prevent nuclear weapons development, urging diplomatic solutions and non-violence. They reaffirmed their commitment to a free and secure Indian and Pacific Ocean, continuing to address regional tensions. The G7 expressed concerns over China's growing nuclear and military power, calling for transparency and dialogue, and urged North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons and seek peaceful solutions.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said on Saturday that international partners are increasingly recognizing Ukraine's diplomatic efforts. The president says that Russia must demonstrate a genuine intent to end the war or face pressure. Speaking to journalists in Kiev, Zelenskyy stated that discussions in Jeddah had reinforced Ukraine's position, turning it into a shared stance among its allies. He welcomed the proposal from U.S. President Donald Trump for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire.
Викрутитися тепер Росії буде складно. Вона повинна продемонструвати, якщо вона йде на ceasefire, що вона...
Now, it will be difficult for Russia to get out of this. If Russia agrees to a ceasefire, it must demonstrate its willingness to end the war, or it will show that it wants to continue. This is what everyone is waiting for. On one hand, everyone will be sending signals, including to the United States of America. I want to thank the American delegation, and I truly believe that there was a good conversation between President Trump and his delegation. I have contacts with my delegation. We really achieved success during the meeting in Saudi Arabia. Next, our partners raised the issue of a plan. We need to put security grant plans on paper. Also, especially the German and Turkish sides, mentioned that a reconstruction plan is needed. I believe this is a very positive signal. It shows that everyone believes the war can be ended and that there are real chances for it.
Це говорить про те, що всі вірять, що війну можна закінчити і є.
Tens of thousands of citizens, mostly students, have gathered in the capital of Serbia for a major anti-corruption and anti-government rally. Protesters from across the country have taken to the streets, demanding transparency, accountability, and political reform.
The streets of Belgrade were filled with demonstrators on Saturday, as citizens voiced their discontent with what they describe as widespread corruption and government mismanagement. The protest, largely organized by student groups and civil activists, brought together people from all over Serbia, united in their call for greater democracy and institutional reforms. Some protesters expressed frustration over economic struggles, lack of job opportunities, and concerns about press freedoms. Others pointed to specific allegations of corruption within government institutions, urging authorities to take immediate action to combat misconduct. The rally remains largely peaceful, with police forces closely monitoring the situation. The nationwide movement gained momentum following a fatal train station collapse, spotlighting government negligence and corruption. While President Alexander Vučić attributes the unrest to foreign interference, the protests continue to draw disillusioned citizens demanding change and integrity in state institutions.
Thousands rallied in Tel Aviv, demanding the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas in Gaza and demanding the government make a new hostage deal. Weekly pro-hostage rallies attracted thousands Saturday night as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu prepared to discuss negotiations for releasing hostages with officials who returned from Doha on Friday. The ceasefire hostage deal involved exchanging captives held by Hamas for Palestinian prisoners. Negotiators continue to try to extend the first phase of the deal after it ended on the 1st of March. As Pope Francis remains stable in the hospital, faithful have gathered outside Rome's Agostino Gemelli Hospital, praying for his swift recovery.
Faithful gathered in prayer outside Rome's Agostino Gemelli Hospital, where Pope Francis is receiving treatment. As the Pope remains stable in the hospital, many visitors express their hopes for his swift recovery. Prayers filled the area around the statue of late Pope John Paul II, where visitors left heartfelt messages, flowers and drawings for the 88-year-old pontiff.
Healing, as we all imagine. I'm a patient at Gemelli and I feel him very close, especially since he is in the same building. Spiritually, he is a great man and a great pope, and the Church still needs him. That is why we hope he returns, especially for the Jubilee. He has taken great steps to bring the Church up to date with the times, with great openness towards groups within the Church who have felt excluded.
Pope Francis, who was admitted to the hospital on February 14th due to a severe respiratory infection, is reported to be in stable condition, with recent scans showing improvement. The Vatican continues to monitor his health as the faithful hold onto hope for his return.
Severe storms and deadly tornadoes have ripped through the southern United States, leaving at least 32 people dead and thousands without power. Missouri was hit the hardest with 12 fatalities as the violent winds flattened homes and took lives. In Kansas, a dust storm caused a highway pile-up, killing 8. More than 250,000 properties lost power overnight, and tornado watches remain in effect across Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. Officials warn of ongoing severe weather, flash floods, and strong winds, urging residents to stay alert. Havana remains mostly in darkness after a major power cut which left 10 million people without electricity. Authorities say the outage was due to an old component failure. It has now raised concerns over Cuba's fragile power system.
Cuba's capital, Havana, is still without power after a massive grid failure on Friday evening, which knocked out electricity across most of the island. Officials say the outage began when an aging transmission line at a substation in the city, which shorted and triggered a chain reaction that shut down the entire system. The blackout comes after a series of power failures last year, which wasn't helped by fuel shortages and economic struggles. For business owners, they say the situation is challenging.
It's very complicated because since there is no electricity, it's hard to keep food fresh. We've spent some hours without any power. We don't know how long the food will last because the power grid failed. It's hard to keep meat, cheese, ham, and more fresh. It's very complicated. We tried looking for ice, but we couldn't find any.
While efforts to restart the aging power plants are underway, there is no clear timeline for full restoration. However, the government has provided outside generators for people to charge their mobiles in the street.
This is very helpful because it allows us to stay communicated with our relatives and know how they are doing. It's a good project. For example, this is a service provided by the government that allows us to charge our phones or torches.
Until full power is restored, Havana remains in the dark, with only a few government buildings and hotels still illuminated. Meanwhile, the country blames its economic woes on a Cold War-era US trade embargo, a web of laws and regulations that complicate financial transactions and the acquisition of essentials like fuel and spare parts.
Long lines have formed in La Paz, one of Bolivia's major cities, as fuel shortages and rising food prices fuel public concerns. While the government is implementing new measures to stabilize the situation, Bolivians face uncertainty and a challenging economic future.
From the early hours of the morning, long lines stretched outside supermarkets and gas stations in La Paz as worried residents rushed to secure basic supplies. The shortages are linked to Bolivia's declining foreign currency reserves and a drop in gas production, factors that have intensified pressure on the government. To stabilise the situation, the government has introduced subsidies and even authorised the state energy company YPFB to use cryptocurrency for fuel imports. But these measures have done little to ease public frustration.
They say our country is bankrupt, but Bolivia is not bankrupt. Bolivia has an economy that continues to generate public investment and redistributes income among Bolivians. We've also heard that I'm going to resign. In this same Casa Grande, we have faced blockades, marches, discredit, even coups and slander, and we remain faithful to fulfilling the popular mandate.
The crisis has also affected daily life. School and university attendance has declined, while the government promotes remote work and virtual classes. Public dissatisfaction is growing.
For oil, rice and everything, we have to line up from 4 a.m. to buy supplies. For gasoline and diesel, people have to sleep. My husband went to sleep on the line to buy fuel. Is it normal? This is what socialism has brought us, like in Cuba, like in Venezuela. They also suffer like us by lining up. This is what we have come to.
As economic tensions continue to rise, the government is trying to implement new measures to stabilise the situation. But for many Bolivians, the reality remains long lines, growing frustration and an uncertain economic future.
A Peruvian farmer is set to test the effectiveness of the climate protection laws by filing a lawsuit against a German energy giant. The pleader wants RWE to fund parts of a $3.5 million flood defense project in the town of Juarez for contributing to CO2 emissions.
For Sol Luciano Liuya, the melting glaciers in his native Peru has been a growing source of worry for almost a decade, sparking fears of a possible flood event as local rivers continue to rise, prompting him to take action. Liuya's lawsuit against the German energy company, the first of its kind, was to set a precedent for polluting companies to pay for projects that mitigate the impact of climate change. He says that the rising temperatures increase the risk of overflows, thus causing possible flooding in his village of Juarez in the near future.
I have denounced the German company, the most polluting company in Europe, and we have set a precedent with this lawsuit so subsequent trials can also be carried out following trials. It is evident that the company has polluted and it should take responsibility for its emissions.
A local resident echoed Liuya's fears about the rapidly melting glaciers and its connection to a likely catastrophic flooding events.
The river is always growing. Who wouldn't be afraid? We have family. When it's the rainy season, we're afraid the river will overflow or there will be a landslide.
Climate change activists have held a landmark case which begins on Monday as a game changer in environmental protection, while RWE denies legal responsibility, arguing that climate change is a global issue caused by many contributors. Peru is home to nearly 70% of the world's tropical glaciers, considered at high risk due to being constantly near or at melting temperature.
4 astronauts have been successfully delivered to the International Space Station by a SpaceX capsule early on Sunday. It's part of a NASA crew swap mission to bring home 2 astronauts who have been stranded at the station for 9 months.
A SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule carrying 4 astronauts has successfully docked with the International Space Station, completing a 29-hour journey from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The astronauts aboard were welcomed by the station's 7-member crew, which includes NASA veterans Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, who have been on the station for an extended 9 months. Their return had been delayed due to issues with Boeing's Starliner capsule, which was unable to bring them back due to technical issues, and NASA was forced to bring the capsule back empty. The astronauts aboard Crew 10 are set to remain on the ISS for 6 months. Wilmore and Williams, along with NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Gorbunov, are scheduled to return to Earth soon. Both Wilmore and Williams continued their duties, conducting scientific research and routine maintenance during their extended stay. Williams expressed her excitement about returning home to her family and pets after what she says has been a challenging but rewarding experience.
That's all we have for now at this hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.